Fáilte over Cóide, you're welcome indeed to another edition of the programme. Well, this week we're coming to you from Strokestown Park House and Gardens, Ireland's National Famine Museum, for the annual National Famine Way. In Black 47, the worst year of the Irish potato famine, a terrible tragedy took place in Strokestown, County Roscommon. 1,490 poor tenants were evicted from their homes and forced to walk to Dublin. They emigrated to Canada via Liverpool, sailing on the worst of the coffin ships. Only half of them survived. The great house of the landowner who evicted them, Strokestown Park House, is now the National Famine Museum. The 165-kilometre walk they took to Dublin has been developed into a unique waymarked trail called the National Famine Way. This year, the trail has been extended beyond Ireland to become the Global Irish Famine Way. The National Famine Way is marked by poignant bronze sculptures of children's shoes. At each one, walkers can use an app to listen to the story of one young boy who made the journey. That was 12-year-old Daniel Tighe. Caroline Callery is the driving force behind the walk, and I first asked her how the Famine Way came about.
Yeah, my background is actually in theatre, and was very interested in the concept of making history visible. And in 2013, we found the ship list with the names of the people that had gone on the emigration scheme. We knew there was an emigration scheme, but we thought of around 1,000 people. So that was the first time that we actually got their names back and were able to rename and reclaim them in their names. And in 2014, the National Famine Commemoration was held in Strokestown. And as part of that, we put up a glass wall with the 1,490 names in it. But as we looked at the names on the wall, we began to wonder, well, what was their last journey on Irish soil like? And we decided in 2015, just a small group of us, to walk the whole 165 kilometres to Dublin. We knew they walked to Clondra, to the start of the canal, and then 145 kilometres along the canal when they came out on the quays in Dublin. And we just decided to do that in memory of them. But as we walked, there was huge local, national and international coverage. And Waterways Ireland, who owned the canal, kind of said, look, should we consider, a permanent long-distance trail? So we did that. We worked with the councils, lots of partners, the universities, Professor Christine Keneally of Ireland's Great Hunger Institute, Professor Mark McGowan, who has done fantastic research on finding out what happened to our people when they arrived in Groseal and in Canada and kind of spread across Canada and North America. And in 2019, we launched the National Famine Way. And we just decided to do that in memory of them.
The Irish ambassador to Canada, Eamon McKee, led the commemorative walk.
Well, anywhere I've gone, whether it's Korea, Israel or Canada, I've looked for the Irish heritage and the Irish imprint there, and you'll find the Irish all over the world. What surprised me was the degree of the Irish contribution to Canada. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. We've been going to Canada for 300 years and we're absolutely a formative part of the development of Canada. From the earliest Irish settlers in Newfoundland, through the colonial period, where a lot of the administrators were from Ireland, including Guy Carleton, who was regarded as the kind of founding father of Canada. Then you had a lot of Protestant and Catholic farmers and labourers coming to build the canals and so on. One of the founding fathers of the Confederation in 1867 was D'Arcy McGee. Canadian jurisprudence written by James Robert Gowan. Even the current Canadian flag was designed by a team led by Paddy Reid from Belfast. And this is a story that's been forgotten. When people think of the famine and diaspora, they think of the United States. But in fact, most of Irish emigration before the famine was going to Canada. And Canada, I think, is a great example of a story that's left behind, but one that we're recovering now. We're really telling the story, the global story of the Great Irish Famine for the first time.
Dr. Jason King has completed the famine walk on a number of occasions.
That's right, I have done the famine walk on a number of occasions, following in the footsteps of the 1,490 emigrants from Strokestown Park who left in 1847. And one of the most powerful and poignant stories that we've come across is that of two siblings named Thomas and Patrick Quinn. They lived in Lizanuffy. They travelled with their family, walking across Dublin, walking across Ireland to Dublin along the Royal Canal in 1847, embarked from there for Liverpool, crossed the Atlantic in a vessel called the Naomi, one of the worst of the coffin ships, landed at Groseal in Quebec, where their father was mortally ill with typhus. They were brought by a priest to their father's deathbed, and as he lay dying, he said to them, "Remember your soul and your liberty. Remember your soul and your liberty." And for both of these brothers, Thomas and Patrick Quinn, aged 12 and 6 at the time, they lost their family. They were adopted into a French-Canadian household. They were well treated. Both of them entered the seminary. Both of them became priests. And Thomas Quinn in particular guided his flock, his congregation, according to the words of his father. And he became a champion of French-Canadian rights over the course of his life. And in 1912, over 60 years after he'd arrived in Canada, after he arrived at Gros Isle, he delivered a speech in Quebec City at the Congress of the French Language in Canada, in which he echoed his father's words, "Remember your soul and your liberty," but in this case as a kind of a motto for French Canadians to protect their culture and to protect their Catholic heritage.
Local businessman Jim Callery saved Strokestown Park House and its immense treasures and famine documents.
We came to Strokestown in end of 58, 59, and we got the scanning and porter rights in 76, and we had then moved to a new site which we thought was more than adequate for selling motor cars and lighter motor vehicles, of 4 acres. But when we got the scanning agency, we found ourselves locked in. Now, because we had been at various sorts of bringing in machinery and old tractors and things, and we were up the street from the gate of Strokestown Park originally, the Hales Packing and Mann family objected strongly. So the relationship between ourselves and the Hales Packing and Manns was rather poor, and it had, in fact, got to the legal stage with the Hales Packing and Manns. But because I was afraid to go down to ask them would they sell some acres at the back of the garage, I thought I'd get a very poor reception. I asked, I suppose, an estate agent, an auctioneer that would have kind of acted for everybody, including estates, would he go down and see would she sell us about 7 or 8 acres. So he went down and he came back and he said, "I'm sorry, no, they've no interest in selling this land." Now, about
How many acres was in total there?
In total there was over 300 acres, good and bad, I mean woodlands and whatnot. But anyway, we wouldn't have been able to buy it because we'd have to do substantial borrowings. But about maybe 2 weeks later, Breach Lane, who was on the switch in Strokestown at the garage, a great character, called me and she said, "Madam wants to see you." And I said, "What does the old..." You can imagine what I said. What now? We had a public address system at the garage, and they were also objecting because they could hear it in the domain, of course, if we wanted to call in some of the 4 acres. But anyway, I went down. And
this lady now, this is Mrs. Mahan. She was the last of the
Madam
descendants.
Hales Packing and Mann. She was the last direct descendant of what was originally the Mahans. She said, "Oh, Mr. Callery," and she was all smiles, and sit down. And I sat down a good bit away from where she was sitting, and asked me would I have a drink or would I like a cup of tea. So this was an absolute complete change. Total, I couldn't describe it. I nearly fell off the chair. But she said, "I believe, Mr. Callery, you were interested in buying a few acres." And actually my son, and there was a very unfortunate situation with the son, because the son was about to retire out of the British Army, and he was a Lieutenant Colonel, and he was put in charge of an area in Northern Ireland when the Troubles, you know what it was like in the 70s. And anyway, he couldn't come near the place because he was in serious danger. But anyway, she said, I believe you were interested in buying some acres, and actually the property is now owned by my son, and it's going up for sale in the summer, and I think you should buy it.
It's the home to the National Famine Museum, telling the story of the Great Irish Famine. So when you visit Strokestown Park, you can visit the house, which is seen by guided tour. You can go into the National Famine Museum, that's self-guided. Also, we have a 6-acre walled gardens and woodland walk. We have a cafe and gift shop, all the usual amenities here as well. Strokestown is very unique, Strokestown Park and the National Famine Museum, because you're getting two very, very different stories told side by side. The parallel lives of the tenants, the people living outside the estate walls, and those living inside the estate walls. And those lives, as different as they were so linked to each other. The National Famine Museum, Strokestown Park, is now run by the Irish Heritage Trust. We're not for profit. It's all about saving, protecting this place, and making sure that it's there for generations to come. It's like a time capsule. It has been stopped. It's left almost as it was left by the family.
You're very welcome back to part 2. Well, the part of the National Famine Way has been the development of a mobile app designed to accompany those on the National Famine Way trail. Contained in the app are the shoe stories written by Marita Conlon McKenna.
I used to come up and down to things here in Stokes, and I got to know Carolyn Callery, and then she told me about they were trying to develop a story for the famine walk. And she said, would I be interested? And I said, that's great. And I thought she was going to write it herself. And she said, no, she said, she met me there and told me, she said, will you write it? And she said, you can write about whatever you know with the people that went. So when I chose Daniel Tighe, this young boy of 12, and I wrote the story. But Daniel was an incredible boy. And then Carolyn actually sent me photos of him as a man. He died when he was in his 80s, and he had 8 children in Canada. And to actually see the boy that I've been writing about for the last few years, to see him as a grown man and his family and the success he made. He had a very bad start, but he made a fantastic new life in Canada.
Anne-Marie O'Sullivan spoke to us about a special schools project.
We did a variety of drama and storytelling exercises based around the story of Daniel Tighe. So the shoe stories that were written by Marita Conlon McKenna, I adapted into a short script for children who would be the same age that Daniel Tighe was. So it was a character that they could connect to and also be able to interpret. So we did a variety of things, including shadow puppetry with some older students, voice work, podcast work. We talked about the canal and the history of the canal.
Fascinating. Well, part of the commemorations was the re-enactment of a Canadian wake. The term refers to a traditional Irish custom that took place during the 19th century, especially during the Irish famine period, when many Irish emigrants were leaving for America or Canada. And since the journey was long, dangerous and often seen as a one-way trip, family and friends would gather the night before the departure for a farewell gathering, which was akin to a wake. It was called a wake because it symbolised a kind of death, the death of the emigrant's life in Ireland. And since many believed they would never see their loved ones again, these gatherings were marked by sadness, prayers, songs, and sometimes even dancing, as those left behind mourned the loss of their loved ones to emigration.
Tomorrow morning, off you go. We'll have none of this hanging around. His Lordship has a lot of work to do. Come on, out you go now. You've been here all day, wandering around your listening and drinking. You wouldn't pay your rent, you wouldn't be in that position. Come on, everybody! Get up and get ready and get your stuff, whatever bits you have.
It's the morning of the walk. Amongst those participating was Canadian novelist Peter Kinch.
Well, it was interesting. I had a chance encounter with Derek Warfield from the Wolf Tones, and this was a number of years ago, and he had a CD about Irish music from the Confederate South, from the American Civil War. And I asked him, what was that all about? And at that time, I'm a Canadian with Irish ancestry, had no knowledge of the famine, completely ignorant. And Derek started telling me all these things. It was like drinking from a fire hose, and I couldn't get enough information. And I decided that would make an amazing novel. It would be a great book about two children that grew up here during the famine. After the famine, they go to America. One goes to New York, one goes to Savannah, and they end up facing each other in the American Civil War.
In opposite sides?
Opposite sides, wow. But they grew up right here. And just outside of Strokestown. The irony in that really played in my mind, so that's where the title Once We Were Kings came from.
Members of the Liverpool Irish Famine Way Trail were presented with a pair of bronze commemorative shoes. The Liverpool team will carry the bronze commemorative shoes along the route to Dublin. The shoes will then cross the Irish Sea to Liverpool before being taken to the Liverpool Irish Famine Memorial.
A few years ago, Liverpool Irish Festival raised some money from the National Lottery Heritage Fund to build on the work that you'll hear about from Greg shortly, to revive the 1990s Liverpool Irish Famine Trail that was put into place along with an Irish Famine Memorial. And so we started to pick up on the research, to go back through the archives, to understand the sites, to understand what might be missing, and to try and regain interest in the trail, because it's such a valuable asset to the city and it tells such an important historic story for Liverpool. So we started to do some work on that thanks to that funding, and we've worked with Greg and a number of research groups, volunteers, etc., to pull together an awful lot more information. Greg kindly introduced us to the Strokestown team, and we noticed that there were some gaps in that research that we might be able to help fill in from the Liverpool end. And so we've been starting to try and do that and bring those stories together. And now that the work that Dr. Eamon McKee has done to bring shoes to Canada, we thought this was a really opportunistic moment to say, actually, Liverpool's part of that story. Can we kind of triangulate that? And so now we're looking at helping build into what is becoming, or fast becoming, the Global Irish Famine Way.
Lovely. And finally, Emma, what part will all of this play into the festival in October?
So we've gradually been building a line of work through the festival every year. We hold a theme every year. This year is departures. So as thinking about the 1490 leaving Liverpool has become quite important to this year. We will do a vigil with the bronze shoes again in October, ahead of our annual Irish Famine Memorial that will also take place as part of this year's festival. So that'll be on the 27th of October.
Fantastic. Greg, you're a founding member, of course, and you're very involved in the trail as well, going back into the 90s.
Yes, I was chair of the Great Hunger Commemoration Committee, Coast to Keevan and Gautamore, the Liverpool Committee, which was formed of Liverpool people. It was an open committee. We had a terrific effort in the city to raise funds for the memorial. Most of the initial tranche of funding came from people organising ceilidhs and quizzes in pubs and that sort of thing. And then as time went past, we began to get donations from all the local authorities around Merseyside and the British and Irish governments. Eamon O'Doherty, the well-known Irish sculptor, he completed the memorial for us of Mourne granite. A local ship owner shipped the granite across to Liverpool for us on one of his lorries, and we put it in place, and President McAleish unveiled it. We didn't raise enough money in time, so we were 1 year late, so it was 1998 when Mary McAleish unveiled it for us. And we also had a special visit from a guy called Gary Whitedeer, who was from the Choctaw Nation in the States, and he came over to Liverpool and got a great reception because of the Choctaw connection to the famine.
The trail in Liverpool, how does it work for people?
Well, the trail in Liverpool was devised by the committee. We thought that we should have plaques around the city to commemorate the places associated with the famine, the workhouse and the where food was distributed, and at the Clarence Dock gates where all the Irish migrants came into Liverpool, more than 1.5 million people. So we raised funds separately for each of those plaques, which have never been vandalised and which are still there today, which are in dual languages, both Irish and English, and we're proud to say that we have more Irish language on view in Liverpool than any other city in Britain. Fantastic. And we're very proud of that fact. When we did that, we decided we needed a famine trail because we had plaques in different key places around the city.
Well, being involved with it for so many years, is there a big awareness in the city of Liverpool about the whole famine story?
There is a big awareness. I was asked to do a short film for the Strokestown Museum about families whose ancestors came over in the 1840s. And, it took us just one day to find enough families to come forward to say, my great-grandfather came to Liverpool in 1847, where they came from, what jobs they did, where they went to live. So the city retains that history. It doesn't sort of wear it sort of up front, but it is something there that is one of the foundation stories of the city, because the Irish had such influence on it. And indeed, that Irish influence, that Irish theme goes right through the city. Whether it's comedians, entertainers, each of the Beatles had close Irish connections. John Lennon's great-grandparents came over in 1847 to Liverpool.
And Paul
McCartney's family also had close Irish connections. So all that has contributed to the character of the city.
Well done. Yeah. John, your area is research, isn't it?
Yes, so I lead the History Research Group, which is a team of volunteers, and initially we were set up to revive the famine trail in Liverpool, and the results of the research that we undertook were published in a book which details all of the plaques that the Great Hunger Commemoration had put in place in the 90s, and we've also developed a print-to-home map which visitors to Liverpool can actually go onto the Liverpool Irish Festival's website and download a black and white map which details the trail starting at Clarence Dock and encompassing all over the city, and the Great Famine Memorial that Greg just mentioned.
The walkers have set off from Strokestown Park House National Famine Museum for the 165 kilometres Famine Commemorative Walk to Dublin. The annual Commemorative Walk takes place during the month of May, but the National Famine Way, starting in Strokestown and ending at Epic, the Emigration Museum in Dublin's Docklands, is open to walkers every day of the year. So until next week at the same time, slán go fóill.